Welcome to another episode of UNICEF at UCLA's podcast. In this series, we are discussing the effects of migration on the Latinx experience, specifically for young people. In today's episode, I am joined by Alejandra Castellanos, a first-year, first-generation Latina public affairs major, here to share her experiences regarding the Latinx community. Thank you so much, Alejandra, for joining us today. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you are involved in and beyond the UCLA community.
Yeah, so I honestly was super excited when I had the opportunity to come and talk about what it's like to be a Latinx student, especially at UCLA, which is a predominantly white institution. So I guess a little bit about myself. I'm a first year, first generation Latina college student. I'm currently studying public affairs at UCLA, and I'm pretty involved, I would say, within the UCLA campus. I work with the Undergraduate Student Association Council under the Office of the President for the Future Student Leaders of Color Conference as the Outreach Co-Chair. I am also a part of the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Initiative as the only undergraduate Monica Salinas Fellow. And I honestly wouldn't change those experiences for the world. I would say that those are my two really big commitments that I really love and really enjoy and really hope to continue doing. So I'm super excited to have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about my experiences and also just the community at large.
Yeah, perfect. You have such a huge involvement in our community, so we're so glad to have you with us today. And just to start us off with the first question, with all of the community engagement you've had as a leader and personal experiences as a first-generation Latina college student, can you share with us how the Latinx community has been affected by areas such as immigration or education or day-to-day life?
Yeah, okay. So I kind of touched upon this when I was first talking, when I was introducing myself, but UCLA is a predominantly white institution, and I don't know if people realize how difficult or challenging academia can really be, especially in a community where you don't see yourself represented. Honestly, it's been kind of tough, at least for me, and I know for a couple of other students as well. Especially within the Undergraduate Student Association, a lot of the people who are in office or are part of the office are underrepresented minorities. And there's a comment made at one of the debates that the council didn't do enough. And for me, that really made me upset because at the end of the day, we're just students and we're all going through this pandemic together. And to say, like, well, a group of minority kids didn't do enough for the UCLA community when we have never been supported, I think was rubbed me the wrong way and made me kind of realize the reality of being at UCLA. Another experience that I think really kind of made me aware of what it's like to be in a predominantly white space was when the chancellor sent out an email about helping UCLA become a Hispanic serving institution by, I think it was the year of 2025. There was a lot of racist rhetoric that came out of that statement. A lot of students were saying, well, we shouldn't be giving these people a free pass. Like, there's other students who work harder. Like, they deserve those spots. Like, why do you guys deserve the spots? And for me, it felt so invalidating because I had worked really hard to get to where I am and to get to UCLA, and to kind of be reduced to being like, oh, well, you're here because you need to meet a quota now. Like, was really, I don't know, just rubbed me the wrong way. And I know for a lot of like Hispanic or Latinx students, it's really tough to kind of assert yourself at UCLA and make people see I belong here just as much as you do. Like, I wasn't here because I am here to fill some kind of diversity quota. Even though I do think that UCLA has an interesting relationship between publicly celebrating diversity, but not having any kind of resources to back that up, you know? I don't know if you saw, but there was a study recently that came out about the UCs that said that Latinx students are more likely to drop out of the UCs. Like, we have the highest dropout rates. And for a long time, I was like, I just don't understand why. But now that I'm seeing the lack of resources, lack of support, it really does come together because the people who are supporting the Latinx community are usually underfunded, Latinx themselves, students, like graduate students, especially like, for example, at the Latino Policy and Politics Initiative, we're all just students and really like underfunded. So I really do think that the university as a whole needs to do better. Yes, we can preach like, oh my gosh, look at how many like Latinx students we admitted this year. But if you don't have the resources to back that up, it's for nothing. It's for show, and it's really performative. And I think it's really harmful to continue this.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm super sorry and appalled by the fact that that's the experience that the Latinx community or even minorities in general are having in the UCLA community. And I was wondering if you could share with us if there's any work currently being done to provide resources or help with representation, and anything that you suggest listeners can do to be allies.
Yeah, so I know at the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Initiative, we're really trying to make steps towards, first of all, being recognized by the university as a research institution that needs like proper funding and support from the university. I know that we've been working really hard to produce a lot of good pieces of research. And to feel like the university is just kind of shrugging us off is really off-putting, and it makes me feel some type of way. And just seeing the fact that we are trying to make these demands heard and trying to push for changes for the Latinx community, and to kind of hear back from administration that no, sorry, it's basically saying that it's not important to them, is really frustrating because it feels like, you're talking to a wall at that point. So personally, I really would want to see a change of attitude from administration, which I know can be really difficult to kind of get people on board, especially for something so big as providing resources for the Latinx community. And honestly, what people can do is just get the message out that we cannot continue like this. Latinx students have a special set of needs that the university at the moment is not meeting. And in order for us to be successful, we really need to stop relying on free student labor to push other students to be successful. So I think it's up to the university at this point to kind of put their money where their mouth is. And I think this was the same conversation that we were having around the Black Student Resource Center, where, the university keeps preaching like, yeah, we're here, we're allies, we support the Black community. And they were not putting their money where their mouth is. They just kind of were like, okay, like we did our part, like this is it. Like, I don't know what else you want from us. So I'm really happy that, the Black Resource Center is a thing. And I think that to keep moving forward, we need to continue, as well as providing a Latinx Student Resource Center and having some sort of support system that's not student run.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And just to shine light on the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Initiative, I was wondering if there are any like specific initiatives that you're taking part in right now that you want to share.
Yeah, we do a lot of great research work. Obviously, we're a research institution, but we do a lot of work in terms of shedding light, especially using facts and data about how every issue is really a Latinx issue in the American agenda. We've talked about healthcare. We've talked about how Latinos are the group that is least likely to be insured. It's a lot of things that exist, but just to see the numbers and to see the disparity, for me, has been really, really eye-opening. I've always been an advocate for my community, but just to see how far behind we really are is shocking to me. And to see that there's not a push within Congress to help these people, to get them the resources that they need in order to have a level playing field, I think is a little bit sad. And I don't know, it just makes me really sad that this is not a more important or a pressing issue within Congress.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And to shift gears a little bit, you're wondering if you might have any insight specifically on how the migration crisis has impacted Latinx youth, because that's a prevalent issue right now.
I remember when I was in middle school, we were having our first conversation about the 2016 election. And just for some context, the middle school that I went to was highly privileged, very wealthy group of people. I was one of three Hispanic students, but I was the only one who really embraced their culture. So I was quite alone and isolated in that middle school. But we were having our conversation about the 2016 election, and I remember having a conversation with this young lady, and she was like, well, why don't they just come here legally? And I never turned my head faster in my life. And I stared at her and I full blown got in an argument with her because I was just so upset. Because I told her, I was like, do you know how privileged you have to be to make a statement like that? It's like there's people who are literally running from drug cartels, and if they stay, most likely they'll die. And to be like, well, just come in legally. Like, do you know how long that takes? Like, if they waited to do this the legal way, most likely whatever they're running from would have already caught up with them. So I think that a lot of us in the Latinx community understand the pressure and the need to find a place that's safe, to find a place where you can have better opportunities for your kids and for yourself. And just to kind of see the same rhetoric of like, well, just come in legally. And it's like, okay, well, do you want to fix the immigration system then? Do you want to make it easier? And they're like, no. So I think there's always this weird conversation about how America doesn't have to accept immigrants. And I think we have forgotten that this country was built up with immigrants. So I think it's a really big issue that a lot of us wrestle with, especially for me, because I lived in Mexico when I was younger. And, I count my blessings, and I was super lucky to be able to be here and not have to face what most immigrants have to and trying to cross the border illegally. So I think that there really needs to be a look at re-examining the immigration system as a whole, because that's not working. It's not working for today's day and age. And I really think to say that something that's decades old and to be like, yeah, this will work, like it's fine, is not accurate and really does a disservice to all the people who are waiting decades to come into this country. So I really think that at this point there needs to be a push from Congress to really re-examine the migration system because it's broken and we need to fix it.
Definitely. I think it's a huge problem in our nation that needs to be addressed, especially right now. And because you said that you lived in Mexico when you were younger, was it a huge shift for you moving here? And were there any barriers or any obstacles that you faced at first, where that would have been like in education or generally in society that you haven't shared already?
I actually started my educational career in Mexico. It was so fun. I loved being there. But I also think it's because I was really young and didn't understand the political climate that the country was in. My mom was born here in the United States, and she left to come live in Mexico with my dad for a little bit. And at one point, she just said she couldn't do it anymore. So we all packed up, moved to the United States. And my parents had me relatively young. My mom was in high school when she had me. So we were really lucky that my grandfather kind of lent us his house. We lived there for quite a long time, up until I think I was in the 5th grade. But it was a little bit challenging, I would say, in terms of adjusting to my middle school. Where my grandfather lived, I was lucky enough to have there was really a strong minority presence there. So I really didn't have to deal with a lot of the issues that I dealt with when I was in middle school and elementary school because I was surrounded by people who were like me. But it really was a challenging time for me because my dad didn't really speak English that well, so I had to kind of teach my dad how to speak English, and asking that of like an elementary school kid is quite a tall order. So I think there was just a lot of experiences that a lot of people who are just born here never really experience or don't really know are a thing. So I'm incredibly grateful that I was able to make it this far and that I was able to not only help myself, but also, help my parents grow as well. But I don't know. I really wouldn't change that experience for the world, but I know it's incredibly different than the traditional, like, American way of life.
Yeah, I think that it's really important that we learn from one another's stories and perspectives. So I thank you so much for sharing your stories. I think all the listeners will take that to heart. And furthermore, I was wondering if you have any additional specific stories to share with listeners as to what it's like growing up as part of the Latinx youth in American society. I know you shared a lot, so if there's nothing else, don't worry about that.
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting duality. I think a lot of Latinx youth right now are having discussions around who we should consider ourselves, especially in terms of race. America is very heavily race oriented, which we know has a large impact on how you're treated in this country. So I think having the discussion of who you are or your race identity in America as a Latinx youth has been a vital conversation in figuring out who we are. I think that it's really difficult, especially for people who come from um, Latin American countries, like who weren't necessarily just born here in the United States, because in Latin America, race is what you look like. So it's not necessarily who your parent, like, it's not necessarily what you identify as or your lineage or your parentage, but it's what you look like. If you look like a specific race, that's what you identify as. And to have now such a difference, I would say, in terms of how race is defined, especially in American culture, it leaves a lot of Latinx youth very confused, I think is the right term. I remember there was a time where everybody was like, well, all Latinos are white, but that's not accurate. That's not true. So I think that there needs to be a conversation that's centered around Latinx youth, because I feel like a lot of people are trying to tell us what we should identify as or trying to tell us our race. And I think people also forget that yes, we have part white in us, but that's because the native people who lived in our land were raped and murdered. And we can't necessarily forget that it was not by choice. And there was a lot of violent crimes that were involved in the pillaging and destruction of our culture. So I really think that right now people are trying to center themselves and trying to find a collective Latinx identity. And I don't know. I don't know if we will ever reach that because there's just so many facets to the Latinx community, especially within different nations and different countries, even within different states. Like, people are wildly different. And I think that we're starting to have those really important conversations of race. And I think that it's a lot of trying to reparent ourselves or relearn a lot of things. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about the anti-Blackness and the anti-Asian sentiment within the Latinx community, especially among the older generations. And it's kind of up to us, the new people, the youth, to make sure that we don't pass that on to our children, and we do better and we learn and we listen. And I think it's really important that we continue to be having these really difficult conversations, because at the end of the day, it is important, and it does matter, especially in the context of living in the United States. So it's not only just trying to find ourselves and our own identity, but also recognizing the harm that we might have done to other communities as well. So I really think that we're all stronger together, and I really hope that we come to some sort of, I guess, improvement within the community at large.
Yeah, perfect. I'm definitely learning a lot from you as I listen, and I hope that as more people listen, we'll be able to instigate additional conversations about this topic. And just in the interest of time, I was wondering if you might have any closing statements to the listeners as to what we can do moving forward or measures that are currently being taken place to help the Latinx community.
Yeah, so I really do think that the best thing that we can do is advocate. I know that at this point is kind of a broken record. Everyone always talks about advocating, but it really is true. The moment that, we start amassing more people who care about these issues, the more likely people in power are going to listen to us. We're a marginalized group. Latinos make up such a large percentage of the population, but we hold very little political power. So I really do think that it's essential that, just as we rally for other minority groups, we continue to rally for the Latinx community, for the Black community, for the Asian American community. It's really important that we continue to uplift and support each other, because at the end of the day, we are fighting quite a similar struggle to get towards equality and power. Trying to have a seat at the table. So I really think that the more we advocate, the more we push for these issues, the better we will be, which, is a lot to ask for. But I really do think that the more we advocate, the better off we'll be.
I agree. Advocacy is a huge notion that we should all be a part of. And I thank you once again for sharing all of your stories, all of your insights and perspectives. Definitely going to be eye opening for a lot of listeners. So we're really grateful that we got to have you here with us to join for today's episode. And yeah, thank you so much for being here, Alejandra.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me.